All right, let's dive into one of the most just chaotic and game-changing periods in the history of video games, the fifth console generation. I mean, this was the moment everything changed. It's when games literally jumped off the flat 2D screen and exploded into the third dimension. But this massive leap wasn't just about making things look cooler. Oh no, it was an all-out war, fought over silicon, over competing ideas, and, believe it or not, over a simple choice of plastic.
And this right here perfectly captures the sheer scale of that challenge. So over on the left, you see the absolute peak of the 16-bit era, right? A 2D sprite. It's totally flat, just a collection of pixels that moves left, right, up, and down. But then on the right, well, that's its fifth-gen cousin, a 3D polygonal model. It has actual depth, it has volume, it exists in a space you feel like you could walk into. Going from one to the other, that wasn't just an upgrade, it was a full-blown revolution. It meant they had to rethink how to build these machines from the ground up.
And that, right there, was the billion-dollar question staring down Sega, Sony, and Nintendo. You see, it wasn't as simple as just throwing more power at the problem. Nope, they had to solve this brand new, unbelievably complex puzzle. How in the world do you draw and color and light up millions of tiny little shapes to build a world that feels real and do it 60 times every single second? And the amazing part, each of these companies came up with a wildly different answer.
Okay, so to really wrap our heads around their different solutions, we've got to start with the most basic building block of this entire era, the polygon. Seriously, just think of it as the DNA for every single 3D object you saw on screen. Mario's nose? That was a little cluster of polygons. Lara Croft's entire character? Yep, a few hundred polygons stitched together. These simple little triangles were the atoms they used to build entire virtual universes.
And polygons were really just the beginning. They basically unlocked a whole new box of toys for developers. All of a sudden, they could take a detailed picture, a texture, and just wrap it around a model, turning a plain gray box into a realistic brick wall. They could create virtual lights to cast shadows and set a mood. They even had these clever tricks like something called Goroa shading that could make a blocky, angular model look all smooth and rounded. I mean, this was the magic that turned a bunch of simple shapes into worlds that felt alive.
So the goal was set, right? The mission was simple. Push out as many of those polygons as fast as you possibly can. And with that, the race was on. This started what you can only call an architectural arms race, and it led to 3 completely different gambles on what the future of 3D gaming was supposed to look like.
Okay, first in the ring, the Sega Saturn. Sega's whole philosophy here was basically more is more. They crammed 2, not 1, but 2 powerful 32-bit CPUs into this thing, plus a couple of dedicated video processors. I mean, on paper, this machine looked like an absolute beast. But in reality, trying to get all those different parts to work together in perfect harmony, it was a total nightmare for developers. It was kind of like trying to get 2 different chefs to cook one meal in the same tiny kitchen. Just messy. Then you have Sony, the newcomer, who took a totally different approach with the PlayStation. Instead of that brute force method, they went for elegance, for specialization. They used just one super efficient CPU, and they paired it with a custom graphics chip, a GPU, that was laser-focused on doing just one thing really, really well. Drawing those polygons and slapping textures on them. It was this clean, focused design that was just so much easier for developers to work with. And because of that, it quickly became a huge favorite.
And then there was Nintendo. They just leapfrogged everyone, marketing their machine as the world's first true 64-bit console. Its whole setup with a powerful CPU and this special reality coprocessor was honestly way ahead of its time. It could pull off visual effects that the other guys could only dream about. But this incredibly powerful, forward-thinking machine was chained to a decision from its past, and that one choice would end up defining its entire story.
And that brings us to the real main event of this whole generation, because it turns out the war wasn't actually won by who had more bits or the fastest processor. No, it was won, or lost, based on the physical format the games came on. This was a battle of speed versus space, the old way versus the new. So this was the heart of the conflict, right here. In one corner, you have the Nintendo 64's cartridge. Super fast. I mean, basically 0 load times. It was also really secure, hard to pirate. The downside? It was crazy expensive to manufacture and held a pretty tiny amount of data. Then, in the other corner, you have the CD-ROM, used by both the PlayStation and the Saturn. It was dirt cheap to make and could hold a gigantic amount of data, but it was so slow.
which meant you were stuck with those long loading screens.
And just to put that into perspective, 650 megabytes. That's how much data a single CD could hold. We're talking more than 10 times what a typical N64 cartridge could handle. And that huge amount of space wasn't just for, bigger levels. It meant developers could suddenly include stuff like full-motion video cutscenes, incredible CD-quality soundtracks, even spoken dialogue, things that were just flat-out impossible on a tiny 64-meg cartridge. But yeah, all that amazing space came at a cost, and that cost was the loading screen. The problem was that the CD drives were just slow. They had to constantly stop the game to pull new data off the disk and load it into the console's memory. And like this research points out, this one technical flaw created a brand new, and let's be honest, often super frustrating part of the gaming experience. The loading screen became this unavoidable break in the action. It was just the necessary evil you had to put up with in the CD era.
Now, all these decisions about which processors to use, about what kind of media to go with, they weren't just specs on the back of a box. Not at all. They had a real, tangible effect on how the games actually looked and felt and played. You could literally see the DNA of the hardware in every single frame that popped up on your screen.
And that brings us to one of the most famous, and honestly, kind of weird, visual signatures of the entire generation. If you've ever played a PlayStation 1 game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The way textures on 3D models seem to kind of jitter and warp and wobble as the camera moves around. So what was going on there?
Well, the answer is a pretty fascinating technical shortcut. See, the PlayStation's graphics chip was built for one thing, speed. And to get that speed, they cut a corner. It didn't have something called a Z-buffer, which is basically a chunk of memory that keeps track of depth, how far away every single pixel is. So when the PlayStation was drawing a polygon, it knew where it was left to right and up and down, but it had no idea how far away from you it was supposed to be. It was kind of depth blind.
So what happens when you can't perceive depth? Well, the GPU couldn't figure out the correct perspective when it was stretching a texture over a 3D shape. It just kind of guessed, treating it like it was a flat 2D object. And the result of that was the famous texture wobble. It started as a technical limitation, something they did to save money and get more speed, but it ended up becoming this unforgettable, iconic visual style for the entire console.
So we've looked at the technical trade-offs, right? We've seen how they changed what the games looked like, but now we got to look at how one of these choices, the cartridge versus the CD, had these massive business consequences that really would end up deciding the winner of this whole generation.
I mean, just put yourself in the shoes of a game developer back in, say, 1996. The choice in front of you was just incredibly clear. On one hand, Nintendo comes to you and says, hey, make a game for us. It's going to be on a cartridge that costs you a ton of money to make, which will eat into your profits, and you won't have much space for cool cutscenes or music. Then Sony walks in and says, make a game for us on a CD. It's super cheap, so you'll make more money, and we'll give you 650 megabytes to do whatever you want. For a lot of these companies, it wasn't even a question. It was just simple economics. And this timeline right here, this shows the exact moment that choice tipped the scales for good. For years, the huge RPG series Final Fantasy was a Nintendo thing. They were completely linked. But then in 1997, the developer Squaresoft made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the entire industry. The next massive game, Final Fantasy VII, was going to be exclusive to the PlayStation. And the reason they gave? It was simple. Their vision for the game was so big, so cinematic, that it needed the space of multiple CDs, and they just couldn't justify the cost of Nintendo's cartridges. That one decision, right there, moved millions of players over to Sony's console and is pretty much seen as the checkmate move in the console war. So, in the end, the fifth generation cracked the code on 3D and basically laid the foundation for all modern gaming. But the funny thing is, these core conflicts, they never really disappear. That classic battle between the super-fast cartridge and the giant, spacious CD, you can still hear the echoes of it in the debates we have today. You know, is it the convenience of a digital download versus owning a physical disc? Or what about the instant access of cloud streaming versus having the game running on your own reliable hardware? The technology is always changing, but that fundamental war over how we get our games, that constant fight between speed, space, and cost, yeah, that's still being fought right now.